All right, so we have two more workshops left. I'm pretty excited about these. The first one is going to be from Jordan, I believe, Jordan Davis, and he's going to be covering reaching Hindu students. Reaching Hindu students. Jordan is a graduate from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And after he graduated with a sports management degree, he joined the Navigators at Miami University. At Miami, he ministered to both American and Chinese students for 2 years. Jordan moved to Kent State University in the fall semester to continue serving international students. He sees ministry to international students as one of the greatest opportunities to reach the most unreached and unchurched parts of the world. Let's give a hand to Jordan as he comes up.
We're good now. Okay. So yeah, Jung told a little bit about my story. I'll try to summarize a little bit. I got a couple pictures. We flip to the next slide. So if you see that picture right there, that's me with a beard in the midst of COVID. Got rid of that. Got rid of that way too much. But yeah, that was me at Miami. Ministry there for 2 years was a little weird in the midst of COVID, especially with Chinese students who went back to China or were stuck in the U.S. due to COVID. So did a lot of online stuff. Just did virtual Bible studies, which was a really cool blessing in some ways. And yeah, over here you see a picture of me, 3 Chinese guys, and then one of my American friends. Just one of the ways that I saw ministry as a student, that was something that I was able to do, was just invite students back to my family's home. I lived close to school. I'd go pick them up and say, hey, let's celebrate Thanksgiving. They're like, what's that? So you'll find out later. But yeah, so I got to join the Navigators as a student, came on staff. And yeah, my heart was broken over Chinese students while I was at Miami. And after 2 years of continuing to do work with them, followed God's call to continue working with international students. Greg is my boss. He's been teaching me a lot. I've been learning from him. He's been doing this a few more years longer than me. Ministry a lot longer than me. He's been doing ministry almost as long as I've been alive. So he's been a great resource. But yeah, so the funny thing about me leading this workshop is before I moved to Kent, I probably knew one Hindu, maybe one Hindu. I think I knew 2 people from India. One was Christian, was raised in a Christian family, and I think one was Hindu. But I think it's just a testament to the way that God was preparing me to reach some of these students and learn a lot about some of these students, even when I was at Miami. A lot of the things that I learned in ministry and in international student ministry with Chinese students, I think is translated. A willingness to learn another culture, a willingness to learn some language from another culture, not necessary at all. Don't feel like that's an inroad or that's the first step I need to learn their language. They probably know way more English than you know of their language. But just as a way to say, hey, I'm here and I want to meet you. I want to get to know your culture. I want to get to know you. You're in the foreign land. Let me take a step to meet you somewhere in the middle. So yeah, really, sick. If you told me that I was going to do this 7 months ago, I'd be like, I don't know what I'm talking about. Now I feel like I know a little bit more, but we'll see where it goes. If this is a blessing to you, take it as a note that God can teach us a lot if we devote ourselves to Him. So let's start off basics with Hinduism. The situation. If you've got did everybody get a worksheet? If you did not get a worksheet, like just throw your hand up. I'm going to work a lot off of this. There's a couple people who did not get one. So there's a lot of blanks on this worksheet. I'll kind of walk through it. If I skip one and I'm like three spots later onto the list, somebody just yell at me and be like, what's this one? Just yell at me. Can we go back a slide? Yeah, okay. Awesome. I'll talk about this in a little bit here. So the situation, there are over 1 billion Hindus worldwide. Maria spoke earlier about Muslims. It goes Christianity, Islam, Hinduism in just sheer number of followers. Most of those Hindus come from 2 countries, come from India and Nepal. Most of both of those countries, over 75%, I think, of both countries, people would be considered Hindu or would consider themselves Hindu. There's some others that come from other Southeast Asian countries. So just that region of the world, I wish I would have put a picture of that region of the world on here, is where a lot of Hindus come from. Like I said, Hinduism, the third largest religion behind Christianity and Islam. And there are over 1 million international students in the US, and roughly 200,000 of them, so a fifth of all international students are from India. And again, when most of India is Hindu, most of those students are going to be Hindu or consider themselves Hindu. So the opportunity, why should we reach Hindu students? Why should we care about this? Why should we pursue these students? One thing that I've noticed as I've met students over the last couple semesters, Indian students are coming and they're staying. I haven't met a single Indian student or Nepali student who's like, yeah, I'm just coming here for 4 years and I'm going to go back home. No, they're like, look, home doesn't have the opportunities and jobs, whatever. I'm coming here. I want to get my green card. I want to be a citizen. I want to stay. So the opportunity to reach these students, these Hindus, both apply here while they're in college, and hopefully they're going to stay and get jobs, and they'll be here beyond that. So there will be more Hindus even beyond their college years. So the opportunity to reach these students is probably going to go beyond just 4 years of college or 2 years of a master's. Every tribe, nation, and tongue is coming to us. Like Marius mentioned Revelation 7, 9, and 10, one of my favorite passages. I've realized as I've been talking to Indian students, there are over 22 different languages spoken in India. I didn't know this at first. I was like, oh, Hindi is the national language of India, and then a lot of them know English. I was like, great, I'll just learn a little bit of Hindi and I'll be able to talk to anybody. But I realized, as I met some North Indians, and they showed me some songs, and I was like, cool, I'll add these to my playlist. I'll show all my Indian friends these songs and be like, cool, awesome, you're learning our culture. I play them for some South Indian friends, and they're like, who showed you these songs? And I was like, well, you know, I got some friends from Delhi and Mumbai. They're like, oh, that makes sense. What does that mean? They're like, we don't know what these songs are. I was like, what? I was like, these are Indian songs. He's like, no, these are Hindi songs. These are like North Indian. Like, let me show you some of our music. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, there's like different regions. I'm like, I'm way out of my zone here. But you know, a lot of people in the South might speak a little bit of Hindi, but they've got other languages, other local and regional languages that they might speak more. So, reaching families through students. I read, there's a book called The 3D Gospel, and in that book, there's a stat. I don't know if it was Malaysia or some other Southeast Asian country that said if there was a Christian in a family in Malaysia, any other member of that family was over 200 times more likely to become a Christian. And I think a lot of that has to do with our culture, right? A lot of international students are like, you guys don't talk about family that much. I was like, well, you know, like, we're individualistic, you know? Like, we go and do our thing, we spend time with family, we love our families most of the time. But it's not as connected as a lot of these other world cultures, especially within India. And we'll get a little bit more into that as we start to talk about what is Hinduism, how does it come about, where do the practices come from. Before I jump into our crash course on Hinduism, I'll just point out a couple pictures of some of the students Greg and I have been meeting, even just these last couple semesters. So the top left is me and Greg outside our student center, and there's 3 Indian girls, Malam, Chavi, and Pragati. We met them in August, September, and like through a series of inviting them to a dinner, or bringing them furniture, inviting them to a dinner, inviting them to a camp, and then inviting them to a Bible study. They're housemates together, and they started to join us reading the Bible. And I don't believe any of them had ever spent significant time reading the Bible. All of them were like, we'd like a Bible, so we go buy them Bibles, and we try and meet up every week. And even this semester, we're like, do you guys want to keep reading the Bible? We're like, yeah, okay, let's invite other people too. I said, awesome, we'll do that. So we're growing. We've got a couple other students in that. Another Indian guy joined us, and actually another Pakistani guy has been joining us lately with that. And then the bottom right here, some different people. But in the back, we've got one guy from India. The back right is Pranav from India. And the back middle is our friend Ayush from Nepal. He actually goes to Wright State, which is in Dayton, near Cincinnati. Like, really weird how we have like developed a friendship and kept going. We met at a camp, and he keeps texting us and wants to hang out. So he's one of our good friends, even though we're not super close geographically. So those are just some of the students. I can touch back on some of those stories as I get to meeting and reaching and ministering to those students later on. So a preface on this crash course on Hinduism. I'm learning this every day, every week. I talk to a Hindu. There's so many different beliefs that this is just my best attempt, and some others' best attempts to try and summarize some thoughts and some beliefs that they hold. So just that first part, Hinduism was coined in the 18th and 19th centuries to describe the religions, customs, culture, and way of life of the peoples of India. So this kind of gets to why it's so varied and vast. There's a collection of combination practices from different regions. I was talking to a friend this week who said, well, in North India, this god is worshipped. Well, in South India, this god is more often worshipped. Or there's story in Sri Lanka next to India. And it's just like, there's so many stories and beliefs and practices that have been passed down for years that it's kind of a collection more than it is a summarized set of beliefs like we would see more often within Christianity or Islam. And then I think that other point there, we've got beliefs and practices are strongly connected to family and caste. Did not decide to go too much into caste because that's like a whole other thing that I'm still learning about. But yeah, a lot of this, the beliefs are connected to family. If you talk to a Hindu, you say, hey, like, what is your spiritual background? What do you believe? You might often get an answer of, oh, my family prays to this god, or me and my family go to this temple, or on Diwali, one of the Hindu festivals, my family does this. So it's really connected to family, and sometimes that's both the family belief and their personal beliefs. Sometimes it's just their family belief, and you got to do some digging. You say, do you believe that? So it's just a way to understand where they're coming from and why a lot of the beliefs that they have stick with them. Again, they say here, there's a quote from this book, Engaging with Hindus. If you picked it up on the back table, it's been really helpful for me as I've been meeting students and even after I've met students to go back to it and say, why is this? Why do they believe this? How does this come about? There's this quote that says, probably, talking about Hinduism, is probably the most varied and flexible religious system in the world. And again, talking about over a couple thousand of years, different regions within India, different languages, that different traditions have been passed down throughout the years, where you've got different stories of different gods. You're like, how do these all come together? How do you. So it gets a little complicated and a little tricky. And again, so under that, there's no founder, no centralized beliefs, no key figure. There's no Muhammad. There's no Jesus Christ. Like, there's just a lot of different beliefs and practices packed into what makes up what we call Hinduism. And so let's go to the common beliefs. Again, this is something that a lot of Hindus might believe. Some of them might reject some of these things, but just as an attempt to say, if you were to look at Hinduism in a circle, what things would you put in that that all might share? The first one God, many manifestations. That there are, I think, I've looked at numbers. Some say there's 30 main gods within Hinduism. Again, it's very polytheistic in a way. Some would say it's more monotheistic, in that all of these gods represent one god. Again, just know that there are a lot of different names. If you start talking to an Indian, you start talking to a Hindu, you might hear a bunch of different names of different gods. I'll point out a couple later on a different slide that we can get to. Again, you don't need to know all these things. Don't feel like you need to be a scholar in what the Hindu beliefs are. But just as a preface of like, you might hear some of these names and be, like, you won't be blindsided. Like, what are you talking about? Who's this? Who's this God? Yeah, every Hindu god is seen as a form of the same God. Don't ask me about that. I'm still figuring out how that works. I was asking questions even last night. Preference for one God while not excluding or disbelieving others. So you might hear this. I said an example like, my family prays to Hanuman, one of the Hindu gods, but we celebrate Lord Rama on Diwali because he's the central figure on that holiday. So it's not an exclusion of other gods, and this goes into a point later about the pluralistic nature of Hinduism, that there's many paths, there's many gods, a lot that can be followed and not necessarily all wrong. All are maybe acceptable in the path to faith. A belief in the universal law of cause and effect. We would know this as karma. It's kind of culturally, karma is a sense of you're going to get this, what's coming to you later down the road. That has a central focus in the Hindu worldview, and with that is reincarnation. That the belief that after you die, your soul is reincarnated into another body. And that plays, again, central to how they see what's to come after death, if you get to those kind of worldview questions with them. With those beliefs, a belief in the possibility of liberation and release, that at some point, enough good karma, enough good actions come to you, or you perform and work through, that you can escape the cycle of rebirth and death, and it can be resolved. You can end that process by, I guess, in some sort of paradise or some sort of end to the death-birth cycle. There's more than one way to know and experience the divine. So they say many different paths to this liberation and release. So then, again, none more right than the other. Some might say, to get there, I devote myself to prayer to this God. Some might say, I devote myself to this social justice cause, and this is going to bring me good karma and continue to go. Again, this is why, I'll point out later, this is why it's best to ask. Greg's been emphasizing it, Marius has been emphasizing it. It's best to ask questions about their individual beliefs. Don't walk in to a friendship with a Hindu and assume you know everything about them. Even if they mention a God, you're like, oh, okay, I know, I've heard this God before, I know what they're going to say. I caution against that. This is just as a general overview of what their worldview might be, so you might have an understanding. But don't use this as a generalization of what these students might believe. Again, this might also known as pluralism, and this can pop up in different ways as you start to share the gospel with these students. I heard it described as I started reaching out to students and started befriending them, that for a Hindu, introducing Jesus to them might be like adding another God to their shelf, adding another God to be worshipped. I mean, you might talk to a Hindu, they say, yeah, I believe God. I believe this Christian God. I believe Jesus. But to them, Jesus is just mixed in with the rest. And so, or they might say, well, your path is the same as my path. We just have we're worshiping different gods. So that'll bring up some different, maybe roadblocks as you start to try and share the gospel with these students. Yeah, so let's go practically then. How might we make and reach international friends? How might we make and reach Hindu friends specifically? I put a point there at the start that said make friends with Indian and make friends with Indian and Nepali friends, whatever ways you know how. Before that, there might even be another point. If you want to add just another bullet point and say meet Hindus however you can. So like I explained earlier, Pranav is an undergrad student that I'm not even sure how we met initially, but my friend Abe knew him. And when I showed up, he's like, hey, you should be my friend Pranav. And I got to know him and hang out with him through that. The Indian girls that are in our Bible study, we do a furniture ministry on campus. And our friend Bob, who works with Chinese students, helps leads that. But any student who's coming in from for a master's program or a doctorate program are going to live off campus, but maybe they don't have a lot of discretionary cash to get furniture, but they also don't have ways to transport furniture. How do I get a couch and then transport it to my dorm unless I'm getting a delivery fee or all these things? So we have this free furniture donated, and through that we got to bless these girls with the furniture, got to invite them to a dinner, and that's led all the way down to this process of where we're getting to share the gospel with them every week. So there's so many ways. Furniture's been a big one for us, but there's even practical needs of giving rides from the airport, giving rides to the grocery store. Like Greg mentioned earlier, I've been teaching Indian students how to drive. That's a fun one. It keeps you on your toes. I've realized as I just drive around with my housemate, American guy, I'm like, wow, I'm sitting in the passenger seat and I'm not anxious. I don't know what is happening right now. So if you're willing to risk a little bit, it's been a big help. I've got to meet, actually you can flip to the next slide, I'll point out. Yeah, this is one of my friends, Synod. So we met him, again, through furniture. We gave him and his housemates some furniture. And then about a month later, they're like, hey, or actually, we met him through furniture. Then they're like, hey, come over for dinner. Start making us dinner. Really spicy. Almost cried. Actually, I did cry. That was fun. My face started to get a little bit red. My throat started coughing a little bit. I drank 2 bottles of water. Still hadn't finished the meal yet. They said, you don't have to keep going. I said, no, we're good. We're good. I love it. It tastes really good. It's just a little hot. Turns out that's the least spicy food that they make. So they've had to adjust for me, which has been awesome. So a month after they invited us over for dinner, they're like, hey, we want to learn how to drive. Or we want to get our driver's license. So we're like, okay. Well, here's what the test looks like. Do you want to go driving? They're like, sure. So him and his housemate have both have passed, got their driver's license. But it's been an opportunity to have conversations with them, talk about their background, their beliefs. And they haven't come to any of our Bible studies or not even many of our dinners. But I've got a relationship with them that Saturday night they say, hey, what are you doing? Come over and watch this Hollywood or Bollywood movie. And we'll spend 3 hours doing that and eat dinner. I was like, okay, sounds good. So that's been another way that we've been able to meet and bless students here. So back to that first point, make friends with Indian and Nepali students. And whatever way you know how, shared hobbies and shared experiences. This can look a multitude of ways. Right now with those guys, I'm just trying to play cricket. I was like, look, I love baseball, you love cricket. I think they're similar in some ways. I've been learning it. Let's hang out. Let's play cricket. You teach me, and I'll teach you baseball. That's one way I've been doing that. Shared experiences. We've tried to do this, Greg and I, through our dinners, and I think Supper Club in a similar way. What's a way that we can invite people together to meet people, not even necessarily in a structured way where we're sharing the gospel, just a way to hang out, have fun. The last dinner we did in February, we just had a dance party at the end, and everybody loved it. We thought there would be 20 people who would hang out and dance, and we had 40 or 50 people. And then the people who weren't dancing were standing around a circle watching. I was like, were you guys planning to leave, or do you want to do something else? They're like, oh, this is really fun. I'm like, you're not even dancing? Okay, that's fine, to each their own. So just as a way that builds this relationship, it starts this relationship on a foot. We say, oh my gosh, that dance party was so much fun. Hey, do you want to grab lunch next week? And you get to sit down and have a more thoughtful conversation, and you can get deeper into their life, their interests, their hobbies from there. Another thing I've learned, don't fear asking questions about family, religion, and worldview. Sometimes Americans were like, don't talk politics or religion. And we're like, how do I bridge this gap? What's the way I get into this conversation? It just happens sometimes. I went to lunch with a guy, actually one of their roommates. I went to lunch with him, and I was like, okay, I'm trying to be aware of dietary restrictions, where we're going to go eat. Most Hindus don't eat beef. So I was like, what, are you vegetarian or non-vegetarian? He's like, oh, I'm non-vegetarian, so I eat meat. But he's like, except for Saturdays. I'm like, what happens on Saturdays? He's like, well, the God that my family and I worship, his favorite day is on Saturday, and he's vegetarian, so on Saturdays we're vegetarian. I'm like, okay, cool. So we can get pepperoni on our pizza, okay? But that, like, the conversation immediately went from, I just asked a couple follow-up questions about that. He said, okay, well, tell me some about your culture. I was like, we just talked about your, this God and your religious beliefs. I'll just start talking about my religious beliefs, I'll start talking about Jesus. And we spent an hour and a half over lunch going back and forth and saying, this is what I believe. And he's like, oh, that's really cool. This is what I believe. Similar in some ways. Still one of like the deepest conversations I think I've had, and most thoughtful just the entire time we talked about religion and culture in a way that better than I could have even planned. I might have come with a couple questions in my back pocket, and I was like, well, this can stay there. We've just been talking the whole time. So again, this point I mentioned earlier, seek to know their beliefs personally. No one Hindu is going to believe the same thing, at least from what I've seen. South Indians might have a different god that they worship than North Indians. And again, the different ways earlier I said about one might devote themselves to prayer, one might see them as justice as their cause. Lots of different ways that they might see their worldview or their faith work out in their life. And it may take time or effort to understand their beliefs apart from their family. Again, it's so connected to their family, their beliefs and their practices and their customs, that you might ask what they believe, and they might tell you this whole thing about their family, and you go, okay, well, you're here, and you haven't gone to the temple since you've been here. Is that because you can't get to a temple? Is that because you don't? I don't know. And so I think the questions underneath that is, where it says ask individuals what they believe. And Greg pointed out earlier worldview questions that he likes asking, like questions about origin or purpose, the biggest problem in the world, solutions to that, what happens after you die. Some of those kind of questions where we might think, oh, that's a bit much to ask somebody I just met or somebody I'm meeting with over lunch to an American, but with an Indian background and culture that's more open, you say, I'll just ask whatever. If we've developed a relationship, I feel like there's enough ground to ask and get an answer from them. One way I actually do this, one question that I really like, is asking them I ask them first about their family. I say, hey, what's your family's like spiritual, like what is your family practice like spiritually or religiously? And they might tell me some of those same things. And then the follow-up question is, okay, do you believe that? Do you share the same beliefs that your family does? Do you see it in a different way? And it's just a natural on-ramp to getting to talk about what they believe versus them seeing it more broadly as a discussion about the religion. The next point there, what practices they undertake. Again, that might be going to temple, that might be praying to a shrine to a god in their house, lots of different things that might entail. But that, again, gets to what do you do to practice your religion? How, and all of these questions, you ask them, they're going to, if you're having a conversation, they're going to ask right back to you. So it's, again, you ask what they believe, and they start to tell you a couple minutes of what they believe, and they go, hey, well, what do you believe? A natural way to say, oh, well, let me just tell you about Jesus and what Jesus has done in my life. And the same thing with practices. It can go back and forth. Again, why do they do these practices? Get to the root of maybe they're just doing these things because their family has done these things. Maybe they're doing them because they don't know anything else. Yeah, and so I've had conversations with students who talk about their family, and she's like, somebody's like, I don't think my sister really gets, the reason behind this stuff. I think she just does it. And so I got to see, like, oh, that maybe is a common thing, right? Like, I've got these beliefs and traditions that I've done for years, and now that I'm not with my family, I'll keep doing them. But then if you get the opportunity to start asking these questions, like, why do you do that? And they start talking. Somebody mentioned earlier, they start talking about what they believe, and they're like, why do I do this? And you start to get to a deeper point where you can open up conversations about truth and the gospel. And then that last one, what do they get out of those beliefs and practices? Get to see a purpose for why they see themselves in a spiritual light, why they take part in these things, if there is a purpose or if they don't know. Opportunity to really dig into what they believe. One thing I've noticed about a lot of my Hindu friends is there's a lot of openness to be able to invite them to read the Bible with you, to go to church with you, a lot of cultural, like, holiday things. So they may be interested spiritually or culturally in these things. I've invited students to church, and one of them was like, I've seen church on TV, and I want to see one in real life. I'm like, that's not exactly the heart of why I want to invite you to church, but if it's going to get you to come to church with me, let's see all the churches. Let's go try out, let's go see this really tall one, and let's go see this one my church looks like it's in a warehouse, that might be cool. You want to see that? But yeah, I again, with our Bible study group that we've had, just an openness, even from different, some students seeing themselves as like culturally Hindu. Again, like I've never opened, like some of them said, like I've never opened a Hindu text. I've never read the Bhagavad Gita, which is a popular one, or the same student was like, I've never read any Hindu text, and I've never read the Bible. I've never read any like religious text. While one of her housemates is, reads one of those texts, more religiously, and sees that as like her something that she goes back to and she holds dearly to herself. So different places, but still both are saying, I want to read the Bible. This is interesting to me, spiritually and or culturally. And another thing that I've learned working with Hindus and with Muslims a little bit is start with shared beliefs, ideas, and morals rather than the known differences. So again, we can easily look at Hinduism and say, wow, there's so many gods, this gets really confusing. Let's just walk up and say, there's only one God. Probably not the best way to just start off a friendship, That's a hot take in their view. So yeah, focus on shared desire for truth. And there are some different things that if you start asking them about what they believe, you start asking them about why they believe it, you might hear them say, I desire, I want to know what's true over anything. You're like, wow, awesome. Well, actually, this verse that I know from the Bible actually talks about truth too. And it's a natural way to say, like, look, we both want to pursue truth. And our hope and prayer is that truth leads them directly to Jesus. Yeah, so I'll jump from there. Actually, we can flip to the next slide. I'll show you just a little bit. So these are these are 5 of like 300 maybe Hindu gods that I've heard mentioned. I've heard students talk about praying to or inclusion in festivals. So Shiva up in the top. Don't ask me much about each of these gods. I've heard their names and I know a little bit about them, but I'm not here to give you an exhaustive background. There's Shiva, Rama, Ganesha, who's easy to recognize because an elephant head. So if anytime you see an elephant head attached to like an idol or some sort of statue, you can probably assume it's Ganesh. Vishnu, and then Krishna. Again, some of the popular names you might hear if you ask a student, what's your spiritual beliefs? What's your background? Do you pray to God? Do you have any belief in a higher power? You might hear some of these names thrown out there. And just ask questions. Again, I couldn't tell you more than 2 sentences about any of these gods, and I could still just say, like, tell me about this person. And there's a story, or there's 5 stories that they could share with you that give background and a little bit of depth into what they see this God representing or doing in their life or in their world. And then, yeah, just down to some enlightening quotes. Again, this Engaging with Hindus book has a lot of quotes that, as Greg and I have looked through, say, wow, that is eye-opening to me as I'm trying to reach these students, trying to share the gospel with these students about what they believe or what they kind of see generally in their worldview. We can flip to the next slide here. Oh, that's really tiny. It's on your sheet, if you can look there. So the first one that stuck out to us, we even shared in our Bible study last semester with the girls. It's a prayer from the Rigveda, again, one of many Hindu texts. And it says, "From the unreal, lead me to the real. From darkness, lead me to light. From death, lead me to immortality." And if you've got Bible verses popping in your head every time you look at this, you're like, oh my gosh. Like, there's so many ways that I can share the gospel through this. There's so many ways I'd be like, hey, have you heard of this prayer? And they say, yeah. I say, wow. Like, tell me about what you think about, going from darkness to light. They share a little bit, and then you go, that's really cool, because there's this verse that something that Jesus said about, coming into the light. What do you think? It's so many ways to start to have a conversation. It kind of reminds me of Paul in Acts 17. Yeah, Acts 17, as he goes through Greece or Athens, and he starts to see these idols and these images. But he even, as he's sharing the gospel, he brings out a quote or a line from one of their prophets or one of their poets, and he throws it out there to say, like, look, this is your quote about this God or about what you believe. Here's how I think it points to Jesus. So ways that we can see shared beliefs or shared desires in Hindu beliefs that can both point them to Jesus. And the other one here, again, this goes back to the pluralistic view and beliefs within Hinduism and the many different paths to salvation or many different paths to enlightenment. It says, when the rain stopped falling, the ocean gazed out at the puddles on the shore, and the puddles gazed at each other and at the ocean. All faiths which are busy converting are stuck in puddle vision, trying to separate the ocean into puddles and then gathering puddles to make a big puddle. They are thus revealed as being unaware of the shared essence, i.e. water. If you are aware of the essence, you see the futility of the conversion game. So again, looking at this, a Hindu might say, look, we all are these separate puddles, but we're all made of water. All of our beliefs are bringing us to God or to gods, and they're all right. They're all okay. They're all acceptable. So one way that I think I'm still trying to figure out is as you're talking to these students and sharing Christ, they might even say, I believe Jesus, but I also believe this, is how do we go from that to a point where they can say, Jesus is the way to God. Jesus is the only way to the Father. Again, just something that might exemplify their worldview a bit as you start to talk to Hindus, if you start to talk to people from India and from Nepal and from those parts of the world. So that's what I got. Again, Engaging with Hindus, great book. If you didn't get one, order one. if you want to, if you want to read it, it's an easy read, and it was really helpful for me, both in ministry and even preparing this. Any questions, thoughts, concerns? Yes, Braxton. Yeah, so I'll explain the situation with the girls. So we got to meet them through furniture, right? We had to sign up on campus, like if you need furniture, sign up here. So they signed up, we brought them furniture, and when I met them, we've got a WhatsApp group. Again, like just a way to connect with them, contact them. So we were like, cool, you guys on WhatsApp? Like, yeah, like, hey, we do dinners, and we just advertise the way Greg and I do it. We have, like, supper club here at Youngstown. We call it KILN. We call it Kent International Leadership Network. And again, for somebody who might be averse to Christianity or averse to anything religious, we're like, look, we just have a group. We want to get international students together. We want to give you We want to try and connect you to other international students. We want to connect you to the community through these dinners and through these outings. And so every time I meet a student I don't know, I tell them that. They go, why would I not join this, you know? So they join the WhatsApp group, and then we send out an invite. We're like, hey, we're doing a dinner next Saturday. Sign up here. So 3 of these girls sign up. We give them rides. We give them a free dinner. And there we say, hey, next week we're going on what we call a fall getaway. And at the fall getaway, we took 15, 20 students, one from Youngstown. Angel came from Youngstown. And we were there with like 100, 150 other international students from Cleveland State, different places. Again, just a fun weekend. Again, like shared experience. There's a dance party. We did archery. We played volleyball. But in the midst of that, we had a Bible discussion. One small Bible discussion that was veiled. It was the prodigal son story, separated out from the Bible and kind of contextualized a little bit. And we got to sit down and talk about it. And then the next day we said, hey, this was actually, a story about a story from the Bible that Jesus shared. And there's actually an optional church service that weekend that somehow we just said, hey, guys, our friend Randy's speaking at this, Randy, who just spoke, our friend Randy's speaking at this church service. You guys want to come? And we all just walked there together, and our entire group walked there together. And we were like, we thought we might get 5 students to come to this. And from there, we're like, hey, all of these students came to the church service. We can invite all of these students to read the Bible with us because it's something that they at least have an exposure to. And from that, these girls all started to join us for that. Again, I think that's one of my favorite things to do is when I start to meet somebody, start to have conversations with them about their background, their worldview. I share a little bit about my background, my faith, and if it's an invitation to a one-on-one Bible study, right now I'm actually doing that with Pranav, who I mentioned in the one picture. Me and my friend Abe meet up with him for breakfast, and we read through a passage of the Bible, and we talk about what that means. And it's actually started to bless him in ways that he hasn't trusted in Jesus, but he told Abe, he said, every time I come to this breakfast, he's like, I got to wake up early. And he's like, I'm not, sometimes I'm tired, but every time we leave, I feel better, just talking about God, just talking about things that matter. So that's my favorite thing to do is get to the point where we can just sit down and read the Bible. I think the Bible's going to speak to their hearts and cut to the heart better than any words that I'm going to say. Right? Hebrews 4:12, right? It's the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword. If I can get any of my friends to sit down and read the Bible with me, I think God is going to speak to them significantly more through that than anything that I could ever say to them. And I saw that with one of my Chinese friends, actually, who I did that with for a few years, and he went back in the midst of COVID. He went back to China, and I really only talked to him once every couple months, but he was reading the Bible. He had a dream one time that he told me he had a dream. He said, I had a dream that, I was talking to God. Or he's like, I went to church in the dream. And I was like, okay. He's like, and then God showed up. I was like, that's awesome. What happened then? He's like, he told me, read my Bible. I said, okay, did you do that? He said, yeah. So I picked it up and I read 10 chapters of Genesis. I was like, yeah, Genesis? He's like, yeah. I was like, keep doing that, man. I'm like, listen, if he's already doing that. And then I saw after a year, almost a year of him being back in China, he joined us for a Bible study online and trusted in Jesus. So just the impact that getting somebody into the Bible can have. Even with him, he saw it for a while as just being a good book of knowledge and words and wise sayings. He couldn't understand the miracles of Jesus. But over time, I trust wholeheartedly that God used those passages. God used his word to work on his heart and say, you can believe that this is true. It's not crazy to believe this. So any other thoughts or questions? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know. I know that there are some places that some universities or schools that say like there's certain restrictions for what a professor can do with a student religiously when it comes to something like that versus student to student. I think one thing, just off the top of my head, I know one of the two big Indian festivals or Hindu festivals that I know, Holi, is coming up like in the next week, I think. So next Saturday morning, the Indian Association at Kent is doing this Holi, like the celebration for Holi. And if you don't know what that is, if you've ever seen like all these like paint colors just like thrown and like chalk flying through the air, that's Holi. I'm like, what does that mean? I've been asking students like, explain this to me. Like, what's the background behind this? That actually might be something where if you see them at, like this week in class, you'd be like, hey, I've heard this festival is coming up. How are you celebrating? Can I join? That I don't think a single one is going to be like, oh, no, you're not allowed. I think everyone, if you asked and you thought of that, they'd be like, yeah, wait, do you want to come? We're doing this. Or actually, they might say like, we don't know, we don't have any paint or we don't have this, and there might be a way for you to be like, oh, I found this festival 30 minutes away. Do you want to? I can pick you up and we can go to it. Doing something like that would be a good like inroad to saying like, hey, I care about you and I've heard about your culture, your religion. How can we start talking about that? But yeah, anything I would start first with meeting them for like food, like lunch or dinner or something like that, and from there have some spiritual conversations, get to know a little bit about their worldview, and they might, again, you ask them a question, they're going to ask back. You can share a little bit about your faith and maybe an invite there to say like, would you like to read the Bible with me? I think it's really impactful for my life. Maybe it will be for you too. So maybe that's an immediate thought. That's maybe like in the next week something that you might be able to do with that and going and experiencing their culture first, immersing yourself in their world, and then the willingness for them to hear you out raises dramatically, I think. Yeah. Another question. So yeah, being that I met a lot of these students in August or September in the last semester, I haven't seen directly any of the students that I've been talking to come to faith in Jesus or come to put their allegiance in Jesus. Maybe that's another way of saying it again, like saying, do you believe in Jesus for a Hindu might mean yes, he's awesome, he's good, but also Rama is awesome and good, or Vishnu. But Greg, I know Greg talked earlier about his friend Ali from Pakistan and his friend Chinmay from India, who is Hindu. And he said Chinmay was the first Hindu that he got to be friends with, and he came to know Jesus. So, Greg? Yeah, inviting a Hindu to church is a great first step to maybe even being able to read the Bible with them. And then again, if they get to know about Jesus and they add Jesus to the collection of gods that they might have, just continue to emphasize Christ, pray with them, pray in Jesus' name, and let Jesus and let the power of God's word start to overtake, and God's power start to overtake these other gods that they have in their life to the point where they see themselves as a follower of Jesus alone. Yeah, any other thoughts? Yeah, so again, Joe's question about is there similarities to Greek and Roman gods from like the early New Testament? I think so. Like if you, yeah, no, for sure. But we're learning about these gods, and then I hear a story, and they're like, well, then there's like the sun god, and this God that rules over this. I was like, wow, this really does just sound like what I learned in school. Like there's a God for every aspect here. I think, yeah, one of the key passages that I've seen mentioned in this book, and I've seen other people mention, is Paul speaking to the Athenians, like, here are these gods that you've made. Here are these images that you've made. And again, I don't think the strategy is to walk up to the student and be like, you're worshiping idols come worship, God who can't be created by human hands. That's maybe a passage where if you get to know somebody and you've been reading the Bible, say, hey, let's read this one. I have no idea what's going to come out of the conversation, but as a conversation starter in the very least, with your friend, especially if you've got a relationship with them, that I think there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of little idols that they'll make, little figurines and statues that they have of different gods that they will pray to in their temples, they'll have in their homes, and maybe even a conversation starter like, hey, tell me about this little statue you have here. Is this Ganesh? What do you do with this? Yeah, as I've been learning about it, I see a lot of similarities there too, Joe.